While at UMass, he was founder and ran the Objectivist Society of New England to promote the philosophy of Ayn Rand. Part of his efforts, he was distributing hundreds of books of her works and sharing her thoughts with other people that he met. He worked tirelessly to forge ties between conservatives and libertarians on campus, and he was a leader for the Students for Liberty. Again, I mentioned he's since graduated, so now he's actually moved on.
I'm sorry, Patrick, can I correct you on something?
Sure.
Real quick? I was never officially part of Students for Liberty.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm a board member of Alumni for Liberty.
Okay, that's where I was just going to go. You are a board member of the Alumni for Liberty. He also spoke at the 2012 Tax Day Tea Party that the Greater Boston Tea Party joined with the Worcester Tea Party in Worcester's Lincoln Square. Nathan, but now.
Thanks for having me, everyone.
Thank you.
So Patrick asked that I talk more or less along the lines of what I talked about in Worcester, which is on the basis of marketing ourselves, or messaging, however you want to put it. So I'm going to start with a story of sorts about a successful marketing experience I had, and then I'll backtrack and say where that kind of came from. And this is one I always go back to, Patrick, so you'll remember it, and in fact he was there. So this is actually one of the proudest moments of my life, believe it or not, and it'll sound mundane, but you'll see later why I was pretty proud of it. And it's that on the night that Atlas Shrugged Part 2 premiered in Boston, I got permission from the theater. I think it was the Lowe's Theater. It was right in Boston. I got permission from the theater to pass out books in the theater, which I thought was kind of strange. I thought they were really permissive with it. That was awesome. And I was going around passing out books, and I came to a bench that had, I think, 3 middle school girls. It was only a couple years ago, so I was already in college. It's not like we were around the same age. And I offered them a copy of an Ayn Rand sampler, which is just a bunch of excerpts of Ayn Rand's books. First thing I heard was, "I don't read."
Tell me about it.
No? Why do you have books? So I thought that she was a lost cause, but her friend, one of her friends asked me, "What are they about?" And that's what I was waiting for. So I said, well, it's about creative people. Well, I didn't say creative. I said it's about people like yourself who want to make the most out of your lives. They just want to do whatever makes them happy. You know, you're here watching a movie because it makes you happy. This book is about those kinds of people who resent it when other people try to keep them down. Something to that effect. And the girl who had just told me, "I don't read," she said, "You know, actually I kind of relate. I kind of relate to that. Can I grab a copy?" So that was one of the proudest moments of my life, because I got someone who didn't think they stood to gain from reading to think that they did, in fact, stand to gain. So I'm going to backtrack for a little bit and give you some context as to why that was such a novel moment for me, because it seems really ridiculous and mundane, but it's not, in the context of what I've been through. So as Patrick said, I graduated from UMass. I actually graduated a semester early, thank God, because it's a terrible place.
Boston?
Yeah.
Boston or Amherst?
Amherst, flagship.
Oh, wow.
Oh, really?
Yes. As Tea Partiers, I'm sure you have some preconceived notions of UMass, and honestly, they're mostly true.
Zoomass.
That's one of them. So I'm just going to give you some examples of why UMass is a bad place. In my political science classes, well, first of all, I should say I learned a lot at UMass, and most of it was not really what I wanted to learn. For example, in my political science classes, I learned that Ayn Rand and Friedrich Hayek are inhuman. In the public policy class that I took, I learned that Obamacare is going to cure the disease of alcoholism and obesity.
Pretty impressive.
There are a lot of examples like this.
And the heartbreak of psoriasis.
No, it's just alcoholism is a disease. Thank God that none of us supposedly caught that disease, that virus.
It's contagious.
I guess we've been protecting ourselves well. But were we to catch this disease, Obamacare would come to the rescue. In anthropology, I had the pleasure of learning that America is an evil empire. And most interestingly, in Republican Club meetings, I learned that the way to win the future of this country is to choose a liberal of the week and make fun of them for an hour and then leave. That was their approach. For some reason, they don't have very large membership. So that's where I came in, because I wanted to be, from the second I got to UMass and I noticed that this culture was already in place, and apparently had been for a long time, I just didn't really know it. I wanted to be the voice of reason, I wanted to be the voice of opposition, and just give people an alternative, not force it on them, but just give people a different view that, you know, individual rights exist, maybe, and that you don't have to just believe what your professors say. I wanted them to learn how to think before the professors taught them what to think, basically. And I started right away. But what I did, and this will relate back to the story of the middle school girls in the theater, and it will relate to what we're trying to accomplish as the Tea Party. What I did for a while was, excuse me, I've had a lot of driving today, so I would table for hours on end, no response. Occasionally I would get a response and I'd email someone, would never hear back. I would question a professor in class and get laughed at. I would put up flyers and they would get vandalized or torn down. I would leave books in the library and they'd be thrown out. So for a long time it felt like I just didn't stand a chance. Have any of you felt that way?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think we.
Well, some of us have been on campuses more recently than others.
Yes.
What happens in the real world?
Well, I'm fresh out of UMass. I graduated a semester early in December, and I'm glad I got out early.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very fresh in my mind to build.
Keep it.
I had one libertarian professor in college, and before I was politically aware, and I just thought he was insane. I was like, you don't believe in seatbelt laws.
You might want to reestablish a relationship with this professor.
Yeah.
Later I'll talk about the value of building the Liberty Network beyond just the Tea Party or Students for Liberty or other groups. But that's not where I'm at right now. So basically, it was a lot of effort for a very little return. And I need to remind myself of some of the terrible things that happened. I mean, I had meetings interrupted. I had a speaking event hijacked by occupiers. Turns out the Labor Studies Department encouraged that to happen.
Oh, wow.
The Chancellor...
Is there a Freedom Studies Department?
There's not. The Chancellor refused to do anything about it. The SGA refused to investigate the fact that the International Socialist Organization was invading other clubs' meetings. You know, this wasn't about partisan politics for me. This was about, I have a right as an individual to express my opinions, and they shouldn't interrupt me. That's all it was. And the administration was behind that. So that's the kind of school that UMass is. These are the kinds of things that they let fly. But what bothered me the most was trying to reach out to people my own age who I thought still had a grasp of their own ideals, and always getting a deer in headlights stare. I bet you've all gotten that too. Or been laughed at or scoffed at. We've all gotten it.
I find there's a disconnect. I mean, this goes back to my college days, which are a long time ago, but I could think of other examples. There's a disconnect between airing an abstract principle and getting some sort of assent from it, and then connecting it with the names, faces, policies that have been demonized.
Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So what I'm getting to, and I am going to address what you just said, and I was already going to actually, was how to communicate these principles. But I'm not quite there yet. I don't have a long spiel, so I'll get there pretty soon. But thank you for the input, because I am going to address that. So, does anyone have any idea what I was doing wrong? Because I am still learning how to message, so I'm looking for input. But I have a pretty good idea. I just want to hear from you.
the system is very well kept. The kind of academics that you have in those kinds of departments, they're intellectual heirs for the student protesters of the 60s. So they learned how to disrupt and to create a kind of noise that blocks out argument.
Yes.
Because they were on the, because they are the heirs of people who were on the other side, provoking the faculty.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the supreme irony of what you're describing is that the original movement, the first student left movement that put forth the new left, which eventually invaded academia, was called, in Berkeley, California, the free speech movement.
Yeah, because they have the freedom to yell over other people.
Right.
And if you're interested, you can read Ayn Rand's book, Return to the Primitive, on that.
Which one?
Return to the Primitive.
Okay.
Or something to
So
that
the New
effect.
Intellectual, I think, was another title for it.
There are a lot of different titles. Those are actually two very separate books.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
Anti-Industrial Revolution.
Anti-industrial revolution.
Anyway, so that's true, what the context that was in place, but I was asking what I was doing wrong. And what I was doing wrong is that I was assuming that there was already a choir to preach to. I was assuming that because I'm a young, idealistic person, that if I offered people free books, everyone would jump on board and be like, yay, free copies of Atlas Shrugged. And turns out that wasn't the case. So, and I also assumed that people would be respectable, which in the case of UMass is an unfair assumption to make. Hopefully you've had better experiences at your college campuses wherever you went, but I didn't.
But that style of protest originated in the 60s, and the pretext for it is that they were suffering under a stultifying and oppressive system.
Right.
And in fact, they used those very tools to stultify and oppress the current system.
Yes, it's not anything new. They're just building on what was already in place, and I've seen it directly. I've had my meetings interrupted. I've had a speaking event hijacked and been yelled over. I've seen the whole gamut of their strategies, but my point here is not to subvert socialist conspiracies. I'm making a separate point that will become more clear. So, in a nutshell, what I was doing wrong, and I'm going to tie this into our movement as a whole, is that I was trying to appeal to people based on my interests, what I stood to gain from them listening to me. And granted, I'm an objectivist. For those who are familiar with the term, I am an advocate of self-interest. I say that unabashedly. But it's also objectively demonstrable that if you're trying to get someone on board for your movement, then you better be able to put it in terms of how they stand to gain. And if you can't do that, then and it's a lost cause from the beginning. So that was a challenge that I realized I had to face 2 years into my time at UMass. I only had 2 years, well actually 2.5 years, because I accidentally graduated early, but I only had a year and a half left to clean up my act and to hopefully get more people on board and to get leadership going so that my work wouldn't be undone when I left. So I had to appeal to them in terms of their interests. I had to grow the choir rather than preaching to the choir that wasn't there. I had to be able to market individualism in a way that wasn't outwardly partisan or anything. I actually don't consider myself partisan, but I had to be able to market this very abstract idea in a way that could resonate with people who still have some grasp of that ideal. And I think that's what we're all trying to do, but having a hard time with.